It was an exciting time for America. Edison was perfecting the motion picture. Marconi was inventing the radio. And in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, two brothers were soon to realize the dream of flight. But there is a terrible dark side to the dawn of the American century. A disease that no one understands has reached epidemic proportions. Known as the White Plague, tuberculosis is the #1 killer of the time. It is an equal opportunity disease. No race, ethnicity, or social class is spared.
Prior to Koch's discovering the tuberculosis bacilli in 1882, it was not generally well known that tuberculosis was contagious. Basically, physicians had seen tuberculosis as a hereditary disease. As the germ theory became more widespread and understood, it brought with it, of course, a fear of contagion.
No one knows exactly how tuberculosis is spread. People are suspicious of strangers and even family members. In this climate of fear, victims of TB are shipped away to the isolation of mountains and woods. Hope is placed in fresh air, good food, and days and nights of constant rest. In Providence, Rhode Island, a 28-year-old man is deathly ill. Life has never been easy for George Barrows. His mother died when he was 8 days old, and his alcoholic father abandoned him to the care of his grandmother and aunt. He becomes a clerk and then a machinist, and then he's diagnosed with tuberculosis. His brother and stepmother have already died of the disease, which is also known as consumption. The Rhode Island State Sanatorium on remote Wallam Lake is one of the principal treatment hospitals in New England. The sanatorium superintendent, Dr. Harry Lee Barnes, a former TB patient himself, welcomes a sick city stranger.
First patient, George Barrows. He arrived November 6, 1905. Barrows was a model patient, quiet, cheerful, kindly, cooperative, a perfect gentleman. On November 7th, 6 women arrived. I remember 81 of the first 100 patients quite well. There were 4 Kellys, 3 Sullivans, and but 1 Smith. There was a deaf mute who became a clever photographer a while here. There was a boy in his teens who sometimes made his fellow patients uncomfortable by removing live snakes from his pockets. One girl was altogether too beautiful for the peaceful, platonic life of the sanatorium. Dr. Barnes, Wallam Lake, Rhode Island.
America, indeed the world, is desperate to find a cure. The sick and the dying wind up in tents, shacks, cottages, ferry boats, backyards, fresh air schools, even abandoned trolley cars, and underground caves. But by far, the most common prescription is the sanatorium. By the 1920s, untold thousands of patients are confined at more than 600 sanatoriums, from Maine to Los Angeles. Even Hawaii and Alaska, not yet states, have them. The disease is democratic, but treatment is not. Poor victims of tuberculosis cannot afford the high rates that wealthy people pay to be at private sanatoriums, some of which offer better care than in government-run facilities. Native Americans and African Americans are at a particular disadvantage in a racially divided country. Several southern states, where Jim Crow laws are in effect, have separate sanatoriums for whites and for coloreds. Segregation is not limited to the South. Delaware opens the state sanatorium for tuberculosis Negroes in a town near Wilmington. 2 sanatoriums in Boston admit white women only. A sanatorium in Maryland is slightly less bigoted. It admits white women and white men only. Many patients are gone for years. Except for letters and occasional visits, their ties to family and friends are severed. The unluckiest ones return in a hearse. For those who survive, the sanatorium becomes home. Saranac Lake, New York, in the rugged Adirondack Mountains, is the most famous treatment center east of the Mississippi. It has been built by medical pioneer Dr. Edward Trudeau, who first traveled to the area when he himself contracted TB and believed he was dying.
Here in the United States, the first sanatorium was built in upstate New York by Edward Livingston Trudeau. Dr. Trudeau himself suffered from TB early in his practice in New York, thought he was going to die, thought, before I die, I'm going to do what I like to do, which is hunt and fish in the Adirondacks. Went up there, got well. Went back to New York City, went back to work, got sick again, went back to the Adirondacks and got well again. Thought there must be something to this. And in 1885, he opened Little Red Cottage, which was the first formal sanatorium facility in America.
For a long time, he was just like not practicing medicine at all. He was too sick. And then he began to get somebody's secondhand medical journals, and he was reading about the developments in Germany. He had begun to take a few patients who were wealthy people who could afford to come here and stay as if they were on vacation. So he was able to get a lot of people to donate toward this sanatorium he was going to build.
On the other side of the country, TB is also big business. Advertisements in newspapers and medical journals seek to lure the sick to the American West. Denver is especially busy. In national ads, the Chamber of Commerce invites the sick by proclaiming Colorado as the Mecca of consumptives, a place where dry air, equable temperature, and continuous sunshine are as yet the most reliable factors in the cure of the disease.
Patients arrived in Colorado from throughout the United States. Often Colorado was the last resort, no pun intended, for a tuberculosis patient. People who had expended time and money trying to be treated in other areas. So they came from all over the United States, and often communities on the East Coast looked to Colorado as kind of a safety valve, a way to get rid of some of their dangerous tuberculosis patients. And it was not uncommon for communities on the East Coast to provide money for a one-way ticket to Denver in the hopes that those patients would no longer be their responsibility. The growth of Colorado was directly related to tuberculosis. There are estimates that by the 1920s, as much as 60% of Colorado's population had come here because either the person themselves had tuberculosis or someone in the family. So tuberculosis had a major impact on the state, and probably even more disproportionately a major impact on the growth of Colorado's Jewish community.
Children whose weakened bodies and shrunken limbs are being made strong and straight at the National Jewish Hospital.
The West in general was attractive for consumptives or tuberculosis patients. Patients also flocked, for example, to Arizona and to California, which had a number of tuberculosis sanatoria, including a Jewish one. But Colorado was really considered kind of the premier environment for people with tuberculosis because of the dry climate.
That's colder than an icebox. Merry maids and white frocks, thinking that it's old hat that I'll be coming back anytime soon. I'm sick about you, baby, but I'll be better come June. Hanging out the window, listening to the wind blow. sick about you, babe, and tired of sleeping alone.
Like sanatoriums everywhere, Wallam Lake, Rhode Island emphasizes compassionate care.
Tuberculosis, like the poor, is always with us. And like the poor, it is ubiquitous. No other disease is more universal to all ages, the infant, the child, the youth, and the adult. The unfortunate thing about it is that just as venereal disease, so it enters our homes, our streetcars, our hospital wards, unannounced. Nursing care depends on the spirit of the nursing service. It should be a sort of religion to the tuberculosis nurse, to give the necessary physical care, to care for the mental requirements of the individual, and to provide an atmosphere and environment meeting adequately the spiritual needs of the patient, that he will be comfortable, contented, and happy. Nurse Catherine, Wallam Lake, Rhode Island.
It's been around for centuries. Because it's such a slow-moving bug and slow-growing bug, it tends to cause epidemics that are measured in centuries. So if you look to Europe, the tuberculosis epidemic in Europe began in the 14, 15, 1600s and continued through the 1900s. And over that period of several centuries, there was genetic selection on the part of the humans and genetic selection on the part of the bug, so that populations that were resistant to tuberculosis survived. The people who were susceptible died, and it was natural selection. But instead of occurring over the course of months to years to decades, it occurred over the course of centuries.
Egyptian mummies have been discovered that show evidence of TB. It was well known to the ancient Chinese and Greeks. In the mid-1800s, a young German scientist by the name of Hermann Bremer becomes sick with TB. Advised to find a healthier climate, he travels to the Himalayas, where he recovers. Inspired by his fresh air experience, he opens the world's first sanatorium in a wooded Prussian village in 1863. 4 years later, English surgeon Joseph Lister introduces antiseptic surgery, which saves untold lives. At about the same time, Louis Pasteur is conducting experiments that lead to the germ theory of disease, a concept that revolutionizes medicine. In 1882, the German physician Robert Koch isolates the tuberculosis bacillus. His discovery earns him the Nobel Prize in 1905. While primarily a disease of the lungs, tuberculosis can attack bones, the intestines, the liver, and the brain. The bacterium can infect a person, then lie undetected for years, or it can quickly bring the typical symptoms: coughing, tiredness, chest pain, and spitting up blood. It is difficult to imagine a more insidious disease.
Germs, TB germs, they didn't just happen. You got them by direct contact with someone who already had tuberculosis.
Inevitably, elaborate interventions are developed. Many are wildly experimental, making guinea pigs out of desperate patients.
The surgery of tuberculosis is rather grisly. Again, desperate situations breed desperate acts. So pneumothorax was the first of a whole series of collapse treatments. Basically, the clinicians reasoned that in the top part of the lung, cavities formed, and this cavity was the fortress for the tuberculosis. It favored the bacteria. It was to the disadvantage of the host, so they tried to collapse the cavity. They did so by letting air into the chest. Then they did that next by a variety of really brutal, by our standards. They used to put lucite balls inside the chest wall. They put paraffin sacks inside the chest wall. They actually would do a procedure called thoracoplasty, where they would go in and take the ribs, take the bone out of the ribs, sew the covering of the ribs, the periosteum, down against the chest wall to virtually obliterate the space of the chest. And this was unthinkable by today's standards, but I will tell you that as recently as 4 years ago, we did thoracoplastic surgery on patients for whom we had no cure.
Having decided that surgery is to be done, we must decide on pre-medication for the patient in order that he may enter the operating room in a relaxed physical condition and with mental calm. Cyclopropane is the anesthetic of choice in operating upon the chest of the tuberculosis individual. It is an easily administered gas which has no odor. Its particular advantage lies in the fact that it is so powerful that relatively small amounts of it, mixed with large amounts of oxygen, are sufficient to render the individual in a condition where major surgery can be performed. Dr. O'Brien, Wallam Lake.
As medicine will eventually learn, none of this, not even a long sanatorium stay, can cure TB.
Therapies were available, and the question was, do patients need to be in a sanatorium in order to be cured of TB? So they did a randomized trial. They took patients and they said, well, flip a coin. Heads, you go to the sanatorium and get your treatment. Tails, you go home. They did it. 5 years later, the patients who went home actually did a little better than the patients who got treated in the sanatorium. And they concluded it was the drugs that mattered. It didn't matter where you got them.
But doctors of the time do not understand this. As the 1930s end, the Rhode Island State Sanatorium keeps growing, as do sanatoriums all across America. By the 1940s, Wallam Lake features an ice house, a bowling alley, a barber shop, a general store, a craft shop, a newspaper, a fire department, and a small fleet of boats. It has become its own village, but children sent there find it terrifying. A kind of prison where they lock you up for years. A place you may not get out of alive.
So I'd gone off to school that day, and there was a basketball game. I'll never forget it. And during the basketball game, I got a coughing spasm, started spitting up blood, and they rushed me to the hospital. My parents were called. Dr. Serps was our doctor then. I thought I had leprosy because at Newport Hospital, they wouldn't let anybody near me. My parents walked into the room after driving so many hours from Florida, nonstop except for gas. They were so frightened and so worried. And when they came in, they were all in masks and gowns and everything. And I remember saying to my father, "Daddy, what's happening to me? Am I going to fall apart?" Because I had read that lepers start losing skin and limbs and things. And he said, "No, you're going to be okay. You have a very bad cold. You have like pneumonia, but you're going to be okay." And Dr. O'Brien was speaking to my parents. He said, "I'm hopeful that it'll be less than 2 years." And I heard the 2, and I heard them say years. And I jumped off this cot, and I started running to find an exit. And I remember that very vividly. And the doctor ran after me and caught me. And I said, "I'm not staying here because my father told me I would be here 2 weeks. And I can't stay 2 years because I'm a cheerleader." I was at high school at the time, and editor of my freshman paper, and I can't be here that long.
Child or grown-up, everyone sleeps on open porches all year round. The idea is that sunlight and fresh air, even in the coldest months, will somehow help rid the body of the tuberculosis germ.
We were a long, long porch, and there was a bed and a table, a bed and a table. We were at least 15 on that porch. And we were out there in the winter. The snow would fly in through the screen, and we'd wake up in the morning, the bed would be covered with snow, and it was rough, And we weren't allowed to run into the bathroom, only when it really was necessary, because they watched you. And if you stay in the bathroom too long, they came in, got you, and took you out, put you back in bed.
Gail Perkins is 3 years old when she's sent to a sanatorium in Lakeville, Massachusetts. Her mother, grandparents, aunts, and an uncle all had TB. Gail's lodges in her spine, crippling her.
The first thing they did was put me in a body cast from my neck down to my knees, and I had my first spinal fusion in October. Then they used to take a bone out of your leg and fused it in your spine. So it seemed like I was okay. 6 months, and then they put a walking cast on me. And then after that, I was 9 years old, and they said I was ready to leave the hospital. My aunt said I was walking like lopsided like this. So they rechecked everything, and they found out the bone didn't fuse this way. It went off to the side. So the only thing they could do was another spinal fusion. And when they did the second one, they cut in too deep and they paralyzed me. So at that point, from age 9 to 12, I was totally paralyzed. And they said I'd never walk again.
We had to have 6 needles a day, right in the bum, and 32 pills. And those pills were like this big. That was part of the treatment at that time. And it was so difficult to swallow those big old pills, and I hated it when they came in. And Clara and I, the beds were so close together because the rooms are so small. We used to hold hands, and they would give us the pills, and we would clench each other's hands so, you know, we could get the pills down or get the shots in. So we became like 2 little sisters, you know. We were very close, and we held hands going to sleep at night. And a few months after I was there, probably about 3 or 4, I think, could be a little longer, I woke up one night and the lights were on in the room. And I said to the nurses, "What's going on? Why are we awake? I thought we were supposed to be asleep." And she said, "Go back to sleep, Barbara." She said, "We're just taking Clara." And I looked over and I said, "Why is she covered up?" And the nurse said to me, "Clara died." And they took her out of the room, and I got hysterical thinking, well, they were going to take me next. Because if she was there and she died, I guess my turn would come.
It is not a life anyone wishes for. And yet, even in such depressing circumstances, some patients find happiness, some fall in love.
Bernie and I ended up making confirmation together when we were 12 years old. So, you know, we'd go in the locker room when nobody was looking and steal kisses. I had my first kiss from Bernie.
We would go down to the movie theater, and the men's ward, which was separate from the women's ward, where I was, we would all be able to join to see a film. I looked over, and there was this young boy there. And of course, I was, 13, and I looked over and I thought, wow, he's so handsome. He had black curly hair, kind of like Sal Mineo, if you remember that actor. And he had black curly hair and that whole dark look of him. And I said to the nurse, "Can I sit near him?" And she said, "Yeah, you can."
My mother grew up in Truro, Nova Scotia, in Canada, and always wanted to be a nurse and wanted to go to the best nursing school in the country, which at that time was Bellevue School of Nursing in New York City. And she went there for 3 years, became a registered nurse. She had had some lung trouble as a child, and her doctor told her mom, if she goes to nursing school, she's going to get TB. Well, she wasn't out of nursing school 9 months before she got tuberculosis, and there was already a pipeline between Bellevue and Trudeau, and so they sent her up as soon as she was diagnosed. My dad was from Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. They knew he got a lot of colds and so on, but finally he went to the doctor and they said, "You have TB." Came up on the train, which is the way most people came up in those days. Mom was the nurse who was going to take him to his cottage. First of all, they got in an argument because he wanted to carry his own suitcase, and she said, "Oh no, you're a patient here now. I'm carrying your suitcase." Then they started going out and got married in September of 1937. The doctors would only let my parents see each other once a week. And after my parents died and going through their papers, I found packets of letters that my dad had sent to my mom.
"I love you, darling, and I hope that next year we can begin to live as we should live.
Always remember, dear, I love you with all my heart and soul.
I would like to give you a great big kiss right now. Would you mind?
Just wish I could be with you, puppy. Even if I'm not, darling, I'm by your side all the day and night.
A million kisses to the dearest girl in all the world.
These romantic stories play out in spite of strict rules intended to stop the spread of TB. At Walloon Lake, Superintendent Dr. Ubaldo Zambarano cautions his staff of the dangers. By now, doctors know how the disease is transmitted.
Tuberculosis is an infectious disease because it is spread through the excreta, chiefly the sputum or in the moisture from the nose or throat of the tuberculosis patient. The disease may therefore be acquired not only by contact with a patient, but also by contact with his sputum. The danger of infection diminishes with the effectiveness of the measures used in the control of cough and management of sputum. By following simple rules of hygiene and sanitation, the possibilities of infection may be reduced to a minimum. Avoid having your face in close contact with anyone who is laughing, talking, sneezing, or coughing. Patients who cough and raise sputum must cover their mouths and nose to catch any droplets which may be expelled. This is especially necessary when you are giving close care. Wash your hands frequently, thoroughly, and always after making beds and handling blankets, bedpans, urinals, basins, emesis basins, and sputum boxes. Wash your hands before meals. It's well to explain to patients why you take these precautions, so that he too may avoid spreading infection to other members of his family.
Barbara was my big sister. She was 5 years older than I. She was a very sweet, loving girl. And when she was, I think she was probably 16 when she took sick. And she had a steady boyfriend at the time named Everett Westgate. At first they thought that she only had pneumonia, but when they did x-rays they found out that she had tuberculosis, and she had a cavity in her left lung the size of a $50. And at that time they didn't know what to do with tuberculosis. So they took her to Bristol County Hospital in Attleboro, Mass. And she stayed there for about a year, and they tried all kinds of things, and nothing worked. And they told my mother that there was no hope, she was going to die. So my mother refused to give up, and so she had her transferred to Walloon Lake Hospital.
June 18th, 1949. Dear Lorraine, the other night when the priest came, I didn't realize he'd be here so long. I kept wondering what time it was, and I didn't dare look at my watch. There's so much to being anointed. Hope I never need it again until I'm ready to kick the bucket. And I hope that won't be for years and years. I just finished writing my darling a long love letter. I hope he appreciates them. What a time I have trying to write what I mean. It's a wonder my letters to him don't burn the post office beyond repair. Mom was here today with Nana Bowie, Pop, Rita, and Nana Horton. I was sleeping like a log when they got here, so I had no lipstick on, my hair wasn't combed, well, I was a complete wreck. You know Nana Bowie. I looked uncomfortable, so she lifted my head and fixed my pillows. I felt like an invalid, honestly. She wouldn't let me move. But I did after. I love her. She's so darn sweet. Lots of love, Babs.
As the 1940s give way to the 50s, tuberculosis patients find new hope. The first effective drugs for treatment of the disease are introduced. One scientist wins the 1952 Nobel Prize in Medicine for his discovery of streptomycin, a potent antibiotic. In America, public fear begins to subside as more and more victims recover. Life is changing inside sanatoriums.
So what's interesting, if you look at the history of treatment of tuberculosis, for centuries there was nothing. There was, as we discussed, magic potions, bloodletting, incantations, then sanatoria, collapse therapy, none of them effective. Then in 1943, you have the discovery of streptomycin. In 1948, you have the discovery of PAS, it's a relative of aspirin. And then in the next 5 years, a whole slew of drugs for TB were developed, and it was miracle drugs. I mean, this was extraordinary, miraculous. The first drug for TB won the Nobel Prize. It was unprecedented. Nobody thought you could treat tuberculosis. It was just something that was not possible scientifically, and the discovery of drugs that could treat tuberculosis was miraculous. By 1952, there were treatments for tuberculosis that were highly effective, that cured essentially everybody who took them, and tuberculosis was no longer a death sentence. It was a very short period of time, a huge turnaround in the prognosis of the tuberculosis patient.
At Wallum Lake, Superintendent Dr. William B. O'Brien and his wife are raising their family of 8 children. Kind and compassionate, O'Brien has special empathy for patients, for he contracted the disease himself and survived it.
We had great meal times, all sitting around, and that's where we would overhear him talking to my mother about the patients. But we learned a lot of other things, and he would quiz us on what we knew, and he tried to get us to understand that these were just people like anybody else who had a terrible disease, and that we were lucky living in the time we were living because they had finally discovered antibiotics.
But it never crossed my mind that I would ever get tuberculosis, because if we were mingling with them, why would we even think that it was a chance that we would get it? We were always told that if you were around people with TB, that you built up your own natural immunity.
My parents worked at Wallum Lake. They were both former patients. That's where they met. My mother went up when she was 13 years old. She was given 2 weeks to live. She actually lived 1 day short of 96. My father, he worked for the Newport Daily News. A number of employees got TB all at the same time. The ones with money went to Saranac in New York, and my father didn't have money. He went to Wallum Lake. My father lived, the others died. My health growing up was fine. I never had a problem. I never was sick. Patients were always around, but we didn't bother them, they didn't bother us. And I was never fearful of TB.
Then Dr. O'Brien came and sat on my bed, and he held me. And he said to me, "Wow, you don't have your ears pierced." And I said, "No, my father and mother won't let me pierce them till I grow up." And he said, "If you can keep a secret, so can I. I'm gonna pierce your ears today." And I was so excited when he said that. He said, "I will be back this afternoon, and I'm gonna bring you earrings, and you're gonna have pierced ears." Well, my little heart was going so fast, I couldn't wait to see him again. And he came in the late afternoon and brought a little set of gold earrings. And I think he told me they were from Portugal or somewhere. He told me where they were from. And he walked in, and the nurse put an ice cube behind my ear, and Dr. O'Brien put the needle through my ear after it was cold and frozen. And I was so proud and so excited to have these gold earrings. I felt so grown up.
Everybody up here, the doctors, their families, the employees, the patients, we were a family, all of us.
I believe my father was born in Attleboro, Massachusetts, and he came here as a patient with TB, came here to be cured, and became a X-ray technician here and spent 25 to 30 years here. My mother was Helen Sorensen, her maiden name. She met my father here, and she was an RN on the 3rd floor south. They met in the auditorium watching a movie one night and fell in love. And they married, I believe, in around 1942, and I was born in 1944. I used to ride on the bikes up here when I lived alone, all through these sidewalks, in the back of the Warm Lake house, in the front of the Danforth building, everywhere. I could ride that bike in the tunnels. I rode that bike.
We spent almost every afternoon at the pool. We went there every day we possibly could. And we were living in the superintendent's house, which was directly across from it. So we just crossed the big yard, crossed over the hard road, and then down a little dirt path, and we were there. Early on, there was a diving board. I remember my brother on it, and I don't remember going on it till I was like 12.
In the spring, it would fill up, and you could throw a dime in there and read the date on it. That's how clear it was. But it was very cold. We would jump in it, and you could stay maybe 3 minutes and get out and sit on those swing sets and get in the sun. It was very, very cold.
Father Daniel Holland was Wallum Lake's Roman Catholic chaplain. Like Superintendent O'Brien, he could relate to TB patients, for he had been one too. As a young man, he was treated at Saranac Lake.
He wasn't really preachy. He led by example. He was very loving. And Catholic, non-Catholic, that didn't matter. I don't think it ever mattered to him. And he was just very loving. Every Memorial Day, it was a combination of First Communion, and that was in the morning, and in the afternoon, we'd have the May procession. Now, there was never too many making their First Communion because there was really never that many children up here. We grew up not knowing anything else, so it seemed like a big party. But even people that were not Catholic, it was a big deal.
When they were in church, had these terrible coughs. And I never knew, were they testing positive or negative? And you had all these people in it, and I'd say, oh my God, listen to that one cough. Is he going to make it through the week? And then you'd see patients that you knew were really very ill in church. A couple weeks later, they weren't there. And you knew that they didn't get better.
Both Drew Green's mother and father were patients at Wallum Lake in the first half of the 20th century. Like them, Drew got the disease and was hospitalized at the sanatorium.
I had a lot of pain in my left hip, and I limped. And Dad noticed that and took me in to see the doctor at the hospital, and that's when they discovered that I had what was known as bovine tuberculosis. It affected the lower left portion of my pelvis, but the serious problem was it was working its way up towards my spine, and that's what they had to stop. When I was first admitted, my parents were explaining that the chances are that I was not going to make it, and that it would be possibly beneficial for other kids in the future if they would allow them to experiment with experimental medications on me. I remember them coming at me 2 or 3 times a day with this tray with a towel on it with 3 or 4 or 5, however many, glass hypodermic needles with stainless steel rings and really ominous looking things, and give me these injections. And it got to a point where I got so used to them, there were so many, that they would give them to me at nap time while I was sleeping, and I would never wake up. There were several times that my parents were called that I was not supposed to make it through the night, and I was put in isolation. We had there was these 2 rooms. They were just called the isolation rooms. And when, I didn't know this until many years later what it was, but when it looked like somebody wasn't going to make it, they would take them out of the ward and put them in the rooms. And then when they never returned, well, we were told they were discharged. They went home. but they had died.
At about the same time that Drew Green is being treated with the new drugs, 2 young patients at Denver's National Jewish Hospital meet and fall in love.
He asked one of the girls that was the patient there that he wanted to meet me, and I really didn't want to meet him. I was just like, no, I don't think so.
So I started talking to her, and she had nothing to do with me. No, and of course the reputation there, the Texans, anybody from Texas was wild and bad boys and all that. So she was trying to become a manicurist, and they had classes. And I was going to bookkeeping school and typing, and I used to go get my nails done. And then she would do them on me, and I would hold her hand, and she said, "Stop it." And I would play with her hairs on her arm, and she said, "You know, that's it, you're done." And she would kick me out, and finally, little by little, you know, we just became acquainted.
To my dearest darling, to the most wonderful fellow who I think is the greatest, who I miss very much and love the most. No one can ever compare to you. Love, Cecilia.
We lived in the same neighborhood, and I was 16. And we started to date, and then he went away in the service for 2 years. And then when he came home, we planned to get married. Everything was all set. And then I got sick. And my gown went in storage, and we had furniture, and so everything was on hold. They tried streptomycin and then pneumothorax, and then they decided to have my lung removed. I was kind of anxious to have it done because I knew it would be on the road to recovery, which it was. Why'd he wait? I guess he cared enough to wait. I waited for him for 2 years when he was in the service. Payback.
The 1960s come, and science continues to advance. Sanatoriums across America have lost their purpose. Some find new uses. Some close and are abandoned. Now known as Zambarano Hospital, Wellham Lake closed its last tuberculosis ward in 1982. Today, the hospital treats people with other diseases. In America, TB is no longer the scourge it once was. With modern treatment, victims can recover and go on to lead full lives. But the disease is still very much with us, as highly publicized cases across the country reveal. Unlike polio and smallpox, TB has not been defeated.
It's still a very important public health issue for 2 reasons. One reason is that the rate of decline in TB is flattening out. We've sort of pushed our tools as far as we can push them, and we continue to see a steady number of new cases every year rather than a big decline. We've had a lot of declines, but it's flattening out. And that suggests that we're going to need some new approaches to control the disease, to really eliminate it as a public health issue. But the second thing that's very important is that a lot of our tuberculosis is imported. It comes in people who immigrate to the United States. Over half the cases of TB now are in people who were born somewhere else.
So the incidence of disease right now in the U.S. is about 4.8 TB cases per 100,000 population. Now that's 4.8 of all types of TB, both lung TB, pulmonary, and the non-lung forms. Let's go to a high-burden country like Kenya. Kenya reports to WHO about 208 smear positive, those are the pulmonary forms of TB, per 100,000. Huge orders of magnitude different.
The situation in the world today with tuberculosis I think, has everyone who's aware of it just terribly anxious and frustrated. It is calculated that there are approximately 9 million new cases per year. I said for America, our case rate's around 4. Globally, it's around 150 per 100,000. And in parts of the world, it's over 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 per 100,000. And it's being driven by AIDS, and drug resistance is exploding in areas. There was just a report from WHO, the World Health Organization, where they sampled parts of the world, and drug-resistant TB is just taking off like a rocket.
In multi-drug resistant TB, it means that the organism has become resistant to our best 2 drugs, isoniazid and rifampin. Those are important because you have to use one of those 2 drugs to be able to get the treatment regimens under 1 year in time. So it turns out that if you lose those 2 drugs, your treatment regimens for tuberculosis disease lengthen out to things like 2.5 years, with drugs that are much more toxic. You have to use things that we call second-line TB drugs that aren't as powerful, that have lots of side effects. Now, the other problem is that even with that 2.5-year regimen, your cure rate for multi-drug resistant TB begins to fall.
We treat drug-resistant TB here at National Jewish, and we're blessed with a spectacular laboratory that helps us choose the best drugs. We have a drug-level laboratory that helps us choose the right amount of the medication. We have a spectacular surgeon who helps us with complicated cases. We have the financial support that comes with the historical philanthropy of National Jewish, so we can care for MDR or XDR TB. Around the world, there's just no chance, and they have no idea of what to do with these patients. If you send them home, they'll infect others. If you leave them in a hospital, they'll infect others. So it's really, it's a frightening situation. And I don't believe in the sky is falling Chicken Little stories. I don't like physicians or public health officers who claim that, but I must say that the combination of AIDS and drug-resistant TB has immense potential to create harm for the next, not just this next decade, but the seeds of drug resistance with TB will be planted and will grow in decades ahead.
For example, in the hospital I work in Eldoret, Kenya, Moi University School of Medicine's teaching hospital, we register at the TB clinic 400 to 500 TB cases a month, just at the TB clinic at the hospital. There hasn't been money to buy drugs. There hasn't been access to care. There hasn't been programs of prevention like we have in the U.S. So let's go United States. TB care is free through all the public health departments. So your access to your TB drugs, your diagnosis, all free. In Kenya, although TB treatment is free from the government, to get the diagnosis is not free. And so, for example, what we found in one of the in my work there, and one of the projects that we did there, it costs about $1 for you to be registered at the hospital to go there to be seen because you have cough. Cough is the most common cause of TB disease. If your salary is equivalent to about $1 a day, you're not going to go to the hospital for cough.
Tuberculosis is a brilliant pathogen. We can compare it with Ebola. Everybody gets excited if there's an outbreak of Ebola virus. Ebola is not a very good strategist. Everybody who's exposed to Ebola gets terribly sick and dies within a short period of time. So you have these little brilliant flare-ups, but then they disappear because the pathogen has killed everyone who's exposed. Tuberculosis people who are exposed don't get sick within days or weeks, but they may break down a month from now, they may break down a year from now, they may break down 5 years from now, they may break down 25 or 50 years from now, because once it gets in the body, the way we deal with it varies a great deal. So it's a great strategist in respect that this staged disease allows the disease to be spread geographically across space, temporally across time. So the TB that's being sowed now will grow in the future, and we better make sure it's not highly drug resistant.
Late November, December 2001, I developed a cough, and I called the doctor and I told him I can't get rid of it. I was taking cough medicine and everything. He ordered a chest x-ray, and this doctor looks at me and he says, I have to tell you, it looks like you have lung cancer in both lungs and lymphoma. And everything, I just couldn't believe anything I'm hearing. I'm just looking around. I said, I feel fine, except I got a stupid cough. I had a full body scan. They wanted to make sure that it was just in around my lungs and not anywhere else. And then my daughter walked in and said, there's no cancer, it's TB. When I heard TB, it was like, well, it can be cured.
3 months after he became the first patient admitted to Wallum Lake, George Barrows mailed a postcard from this distant place. He still had hope. 15 months passed and his condition worsened. Tuberculosis was consuming his lungs and his brain. And by the spring of 1907, after a year and a half in a sanatorium, he was beyond salvation. Superintendent Barnes sent him back to the city on a train. And on June 4th, 1907, he died. A horse-drawn wagon carried him to Providence's North Burial Ground, where he rests now. Modern treatment also came too late for the beautiful Barbara Bowie, who dreamed of going home to marry her sweetheart, Everett Westgate.
After she died, somebody in the family, a week after she was buried, went to the grave site, and there was a bridal bouquet left on the grave. And we were all certain that Everett had left it there.
Dear Lorraine, surprised? Well, so am I. When I write to you, it's always on the spur of the moment. But I think of you just the same. Everett didn't come this week. Honestly, I never know when to expect him, and I miss him so much. I wonder if he knows that. I've told him enough times, but maybe he doesn't believe me, huh? Oh well. It's beautiful out again today. To be well and out of here. I wish they'd tell me something really definite, but I'll have to wait for another x-ray, I guess. I'm so lonesome. If I ever know anyone in a place like this when I'm well, I'll visit them as often as I can. I get ready for company every single Thursday, and I have company all right. Disappointment. That's about all. Good thing we have movies.